Joliet,
Here.
Jackson,
Here.
Loops,
Here.
Kokendorfer, Nelson.
Here.
I'm sure you have a quorum.
Excellent. Next up, we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand up. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up, we'll move on to item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes of May 3rd, 2022. If there aren't any changes or corrections, do we have a motion? Motion by Commissioner Joliet, support by Commissioner Lubes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes approved. Next up, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. If there aren't any changes or corrections, do we have a motion to approve our agenda today? Motion by Commissioner Lubes, support by Commissioner Joliet. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Agenda's approved. Next up, we'll move on to our first public comment of the meeting. As a reminder, individuals get 3 minutes, and this is specific to items that are presently on our agenda. So at this time, if there's anyone from the public who'd like to address the Legislative Affairs and Government Operations Committee, please make your way to the head of the table and state your name and community in which you reside in. Okay. Seeing that there's no one from the public who would like to address the committee, I will now close public comment. Given that we don't have any communication items this morning, we'll jump on down to number 8, which is our consent agenda. We've got 6 items under our consent agenda. We've got item A, resolution declaring May 25th, 2022 as National Missing Children's Day in Oakland County. Item B, resolution designating May 2022 as Mental Health Month and May 7th, 2022 as Children's Mental Health Awareness Day in Oakland County. Item C, resolution recognizing May 1st through the 8th as Teacher Appreciation Week here in Oakland County. Item D, resolution designating May 2022 as National Drug Court Month in Oakland County. Item E, resolution supporting the 2022 Stepping Up initiative to reduce the number of people with mental illnesses in jails. And the last item, item F, resolution declaring June 3rd, 2022 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day in Oakland County and support the Wear Orange campaign. Do we have a motion to accept items A through F on our consent agenda? Motion by Commissioner Lubes, support by Commissioner Jackson. Is that a voice vote? Roll call, prompt the vote, please. Oh, Commissioner Gershenson, did you have?
I did have a question.
Sure.
I'd like to know more about this, well, I'm going to vote, about this Stepping Up initiative, how it's funded, who, I don't see a commissioner's name, I see all of us. How did this come forward, or do we know?
That's a really great question. I'm going in, Mr. Andrews, do you have any insight you could provide us?
So this is on the annual list that you received
Okay.
at the beginning of the, I think it was in January, that has been a kind of an ongoing annual resolution that has been presented.
I understand. So
I'm not sure if any commissioners signed on to that, but again, it's just something that the board has done each and every year.
So this supporting the 2022 Stepping Up is interesting, because do they need more funding? Where are they with funding? I'd like to get some more information on that. Maybe at the next meeting we could have.
Postpone the item if you want.
Oh. Oh, okay. Then I guess, is there a month? Is it time sensitive?
Well, I do know, Commissioner, to go
It's
back to one
May.
of your initial inquiries, it looks like within the resolution, towards the end, so the last, I would say, well, more specifically, the last couple whereas clauses prior to the further resolve clauses, that it talks a lot about OCHN
Right.
provides funding for the programs and services with the county jail. And has identified initiatives such as the pre-booking jail diversion programs, the Jail Alliance with support, the JAWS, and they also have identified funding for the crisis intervention team training for law enforcement officers. So it sounds like a large part of the programs and initiatives within this is funded by OCHN.
Right, so maybe I could ask Dana to weigh in at the next meeting, just to give us an update on, do they have enough funds? Where do they stand? Because, I mean, it sounds like an amazing program, and just rather than pass it through. And then the other question, I just wanted to make a comment on the declaration of June 3rd as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. During my comments about Commissioner Dwyer at the last meeting, one of the most incredible projects we worked on was gun safety awareness. And during public comment, I was hoping she would be here today, because since we don't respond to public comment, there was an inference that was not in support of the Second Amendment. And one of the things Commissioner Dwyer and I were quite clear on was that the committee supported the Second Amendment. So sometimes it's very hard to sit and listen to inaccurate public comments, then the information gets disseminated out into the public, and it's not true. So I just wanted to clarify that any effort I worked on with Commissioner Dwyer was in support of the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jackson.
I just want to step back. You saw my hand up waving because the Stepping Up initiative came out of NACO originally, and Commissioner Shelley Taub was one of the first people to really further this throughout our board. So if you want to research NACO's involvement, NACO's help with us bringing forth the resolution, that's where to go.
Got
That's
it.
where it came from.
Thank you.
Excellent. I appreciate that background information. Thank you. So Commissioner Gershon said, are you making a motion to postpone item E?
No, because it's May sensitive. I just wanted to, I could reach out to Dana Lassaby myself and bring
Sure.
it back to the next meeting. I
Sure.
just would like to get an update on where that stands and funding-wise.
Absolutely. So with that being said, do we know who gave the motion in the?
I can start the vote.
Excellent. So we've had a motion. Who made?
We have Lubes and Jackson.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Lubes to support items A through F, and then, or motion by Commissioner Lubes, support by Commissioner Jackson for items A through F under our consent agenda. And now we'll move forwards.
I'm sorry, I have another
Sure.
question.
Absolutely.
In regards to the National Missing Children's Day in Oakland County, that originated with work we were doing with Internet Safety and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children prior to any of our work with human trafficking. But how do we go about amending these resolutions that are here? Because I'd really like to see it missing persons, children and persons, because we have a resident, Danielle Stislicki, from Farmington Hills.
Right.
Hills is still missing. And it's becoming more and more prominent, and people are talking more about Crime Stoppers has gotten involved. Is there a way for us to amend these, what do we call these resolutions?
Yeah,
We have a name.
So these are the honorary. You bring up a really good question, and I know that we've had some fruitful conversations at the onset of the term, so it was a little bit ago.
Okay.
So if you can recall, right at the onset of the 2021 year, we had discussions in regards to the honorary memorial resolutions that have been historically, at least, for the past, it's been, some of these have been around for many years. But to go back to your first question of, these are the honorary memorial resolutions that we initially talked about, and we had the conversation of, do we want to continue? We valued all of them, but there was discussions on, okay, what are we going to do with them, right? So we went back into that conversation of, it's great that we're doing honorary memorial resolutions, but we don't want it to just sit on a shelf in some virtual cloud, right? So what are we going to do with it? So within those conversations, I think it would be wise as we embark on the next term to really have conversations, really diving into, are these things that we need to, update? And essentially, too, are there things that, while we recognize are still important, are they still higher priorities, right? Because the LAGO committee does get all of the honorary memorial resolutions. So I definitely think it would be wise to maybe start having some conversations about some updates. But as far as what you're asking for today, can we? I don't see why we couldn't do an amendment to strike out children and insert individuals or persons. Is that what you would like to do?
Really, I need to read the body of it to be forthright, and then maybe.
We can always do it on the
after
boardroom
this,
floor.
To the board meeting, and just
Absolutely.
maybe do a comment. Then at that time, maybe we can.
Okay.
Speak to it.
Okay, so then, should we say that after we take the vote, or is it?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so we'll revisit that in one moment. So
Yeah, so the vote is out there.
the motion's been made by Commissioner Lutz, support by Commissioner Jackson, for items A through F on the consent agenda. So let's go ahead and do a prompt the vote roll call.
Okay, it's already out there.
We did it twice.
Yeah.
Did it. Like I hadn't pushed my.
Penny and I are.
But we were still talking.
Yeah.
Okay. Madam Chair, you have 5 yeas, 0 nays.
5 yeas, 0 nays. All the consent agenda items have been approved. So Commissioner Jackson, would you like, even though, so we had a unanimous vote of all the items underneath the consent agenda, would you like item E to be pulled from the consent agenda and put on the regular agenda for our board meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
it should be pretty simple.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll now move on to our regular agenda. Did we do the motion to approve? No, we didn't, not the regular agenda.
For what?
Their regular
No,
agenda.
No, you do every.
Next up is the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve our agenda as is?
Wait, no, we did.
We did, right?
We did do approve the agenda. but
Okay.
Now we're on the regular agenda, we're on the first item.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So we'll move on to item A, which is Parks and Recreation, contract with Holly Township for bill of sale of Ernst Barn at Waterford Oaks County Park. Do we have a motion? Motion by Commissioner Gershenson, support by Commissioner Joliet. And I believe that we've got Melissa Prouse with us here this morning. So good morning, Melissa.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a bill of sale per the county's disposal of surplus county equipment policy. This is for what we refer to as the Ernst Barn here at Waterford Oaks. It was part of the Ernst Greenhouse acquisition that we did back in 2010. We've never used the barn. It's never been considered in stable or safe enough condition for us to use for anything. And we haven't really had the money to put into it to try to restore it. It's a very unique, cool structure. We think it was built around the 1850s. So it's potentially one of the oldest barns within Oakland County. So rather than just remove it or tear it down, we knew there was some interest from the community. We actually put out an RFP back in 2018 to see if anybody wanted to come and deconstruct it and move it to their property and reconstruct it. We did have a taker on that who was going to rebuild it on private property, but around the time that was happening, we were getting some interest from Holly Township who wanted to potentially do the same thing and move it to a developing kind of heritage farm park that they're working on in the township. So the person who got the bid gladly handed it over to Holly Township so that it would become a public asset, not on private property. And they're going to use it, I believe, as sort of the storage and staging area for a community garden at that park in Holly. So this essentially sells the barn to them for $1 so that it can live on in a new location within the county.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. Commissioner Gershenson.
Well, I am particularly excited about this, and I will explain why. As a little girl, and it wasn't 1850, but we used to go to the Ernst farm. It was just well known, the Ernst family in this area. I don't know if those of you who grew up in this area remember, and we would buy our corn there, and a lot of our annuals. Now, the Pontiac Farmers Market was still there at that time, but the Ernst Farm was kind of a legendary spot right on the corner of Watkins and Scott, right?
Yeah.
And so when it went over to Waterford Oaks, I was thrilled, and now I'm just so excited that it's been reappropriated. I think that's great. And, you know, I've heard that this barnwood is very desirable, so I could no, I mean it, that,
There was another project in Clarkston, I know what you're talking about, that old wood, it's very durable. They don't,
a
you
lot
can't
of,
get it anymore,
oh,
yeah.
you know what? that Sylvan Farm to Table restaurant
Yes.
has repurposed, that's right. So anyway, I'm really excited about it and glad that you were so forward thinking about repurposing that structure and that we have a taker.
Yeah, and they're planning to move it. They're ready to go. They're essentially just waiting for the approval from the commission. So the contractor's all lined up, so they'll start immediately. I think the plan is to have it essentially removed from the site by July or August. So, we can let you know when it's fully reconstructed back over in Holly, and you can head out there and see it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioners, is there any further discussion on item A? Seeing none, please prompt the vote.
Madam Chair, you have 5 yeas, 0 nays.
5 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries. Next up, we'll move on to item number B, which is Parks and Recreation, grant acceptance with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the Mill Pond Dam Removal and Restoration Project. Do we have a motion? Motion by Commissioner Loop, support by Commissioner Joliet. And again, welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. And this one has been before you before when we brought the application through. So this is another rather substantial grant toward that dam removal project. This is from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Southeast Michigan Resilience Fund. I just wanted to provide a brief update on this project if I could. We have 4 grants in total right now toward this project. We did go out to bid. We were planning to do the project this spring and summer. Unfortunately, with the economy in the shape that it's in and the supply chain issues that are happening, we had the project estimated at about $2.3 million. Our lowest bid came back at 4.1.
Wow.
Which is significantly higher than what we had intended to spend on this project. There were also some issues with, we couldn't even get the concrete culvert delivered until the fall or early winter, which throws off the whole construction budget essentially, or schedule rather. So what we decided to do with the township is to kind of put the project on hold for this year currently. We are actively seeking other grant sources and have leads on a few others that might, get us a little bit more funding toward it. And we're going to rebid in the fall and cross our fingers that some of those issues get resolved and/or we are able to get some more grant funding so that we can do the project next year. So all of our grants that we've received so far have gladly given us an extension so that we can hold on to that money until we can get the project done.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. I know that we've had, as you said, at least four already come before us, and I completely understand the extra costs, unfortunately, just given where we are at right now with inflation in our economy. However, I definitely will always continue to support improving our natural habitats and restoring our wetlands. So thank you. I do have one quick silly question. What is a mud puppy?
Mud puppy, that is a good question.
Is it a fish? I think Commissioner Joliet said it's a fish.
It is a fish, yeah, and it looks kind of how it sounds.
Okay, all right. I know we've talked
Yeah.
about the rattlesnakes and the turtles, I believe the blandy turtles, but I hadn't come across the mud puppies. But I see that it's an important species within this habitat. So thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Joliet. Commissioner Gershenson.
So, Ms. Prowse, I just want to be reassured that the delay isn't going to be causing any other damage to the habitat, because this is it the 4th year or just it's been postponed 4 times?
No, 4th resolution.
No, we haven't postponed it 4 times. Essentially, this is just a postponement of 1 year from when we were going to do the construction. So right now, essentially the project as a whole is designed to remove the dam and turn the mill pond back into the natural river channel and restore the river and restore the wetlands around it. So it's kind of just going to be status quo for the next year. So no further detriment is happening because we're waiting 1 year.
So the dam isn't on the list of one of those dams that's failing and that could break down and affect. Okay.
It's not. It is considered a low hazard dam. It does have a tendency to overtop when we get those 100-year storm events. which can be problematic, but it is considered a low hazard dam at this point. So everybody's comfortable with waiting one more year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gershenson. Commissioners, is there any further discussion on item B? Seeing none, please prompt the vote. Roll call, please. I was like, where'd you go?
Madam Chair, you have 5 yeas, 0 nays.
5 yeas, 0 nays, motion carries. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Melissa. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. Our last item today, which is item C, Board of Commissioners, we have our presentation of Robin Carter Cooper, our Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Robin. I don't know, I believe, oh, there we are. Good morning, Robin. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
We are
Good.
doing great. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope that everything works. Megan got me set beforehand, so I'm hoping. Is it showing?
Yep.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So today I'm going to actually work with you all, engage with you all kind of on a high-level overview. I have gotten so many questions from not just community members, but even commissioners on some questions around, how are people reacting to the change of DEI? How are things going? Do you feel the work is moving fast enough? Is everyone in the county going to be trained? How will you ensure the work is sustained? And I'm literally reading off of notes every time I get a call or something comes up. I just kind of jot down these questions, and it was helpful for me to put together more of a holistic presentation. I hope this is helpful today to just kind of recenter to make sure everyone is aware of the direction we're moving when it comes to DE&I, and then also offer you some opportunities to ask me questions. I think it'll be helpful that we're all on the same page because this is a huge process, and I want to make sure that I've done a good job of keeping you all in the loop from the beginning to the end. So when I talk about operationalizing equity, and from the moment you all have met me, I've really centered this work in that. And I just want to remind you all that when an organization has equity operationalized, you see all of equity reflected in their programs, the policies, and the operations. And that's how it's operationalized. So if we're going that deep, which a lot of organizations don't go, right? But we are choosing to go that deep, that we want a countywide operationalized equity program, then we know that it's going to take a lot of work. And I thought it might be helpful today to share with you what that looks like. So the topics that I want to get through today are really what is the cycle of dysfunctional equity work? Because I think that's important to center why typically equity work stops. An overview of DEI culture transformation, because that's in fact what we're doing. We're trying to transform a whole culture, and that's a lot of work. What does DEI change management look like? That is the strategy that I typically use to change culture in an organization. And so it's important to me that you all are aware of the process that I'm using. Responding to the culture change. So what do all of those emotions look like? I've gotten so many questions from people like, how are you doing and how are other people doing in receiving this change? And I think it's important to kind of talk about what that looks like in this work. And then finally, building capacity for sustainability. As you can see, my name on the side, and then Jamie Finner is my executive assistant. But I think it's important to talk about what are some of the other ways that I'm thinking about building capacity for sustainability and sharing that with you all so that you understand, where I'm coming from and can have an opportunity to ask questions about it. So the first part of thinking about the cycle of dysfunctional equity work, typically when you start this work, right, when there's a chief diversity officer, there's a catalyst. So for Oakland County, whether the catalyst is internal because of something internal or external, the reality is that Oakland County, Board of Commissioners championed this position. And I feel so blessed and honored that, you all chose me to lead this work. But it's important to understand that a lot of organizations have a catalyst that starts, and then we kind of move towards this commitment to equity. And it feels really exciting, and we're charged up. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we have been. We've kind of been like excited in that place where it's like, we've got Robin, right? And we're all excited about this work, and we're starting to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and challenging some of the language that this doesn't just mean race, and what does that mean for neurodiversity, and what does that mean for gender equity, and all of these areas that we have to talk about, and that's so exciting. But then we start to move towards, right, typically in this phase, looking at implementation. And that's where people start to get frustrated, and we'll look at that a little bit further. But I want to make sure that you all kind of see this cycle of dysfunctional equity so that you understand when we go from the catalyst to the commitment to problems with implementation, and then we kind of like let it die right back down to where it began. It's important for you to understand why we're being intentional. And sometimes when we should be moving faster, we might be slowing down because it is important to be intentional so that we don't fall off. At any time during this presentation, feel free to ask questions, or you can ask at the end. I'm pretty easy, so I just want to put that out there. When we think about the domains of organizational transformation, typically I center it in these 8 areas. And why this is so important is so many times people ask me, Robin, where's the training? Are we doing training? Are we mandating training? Is everyone going to get training? And training is important, but the purpose of training is to really set a framework of we all have the same language, we all kind of understand what's expected, we all are coming from the same premises that we understand what DEI is. But what we know also is that training is not the only thing, right? It's so many other areas. So I want to share with you that some of those other areas that we're looking at are DEI efficacy in the organizational culture. So that's looking at, for an example, the internal and external equity audits that we have. Those are looking at how is DEI impacting or affecting our current culture. But we also can look in that area on workforce diversity. We can look at how people are showing up in this organization and how they feel their culture is valued or not. So when we look at that one little category, it's full of a lot of things that we have to assess in our culture. The next one is a revolving information loop. So that's keeping people engaged on what we're doing. So for example, what I'm doing now, but also making connections and normalizing the conversation, making sure that people feel normalized when talking about DEI or when we're looking at hiring for equity. I just had someone come in a couple of months ago to talk with the Equity Council about autism awareness and thinking about different areas on inequity and impact. And so that revolving information loop means that we have to keep these conversations fresh and moving through the organization so it feels normal and not a departure from normal, right? But rather, this is what we do. This is who we are. Building capacity and increasing allies is an example of our Equity Council, and we'll go a little bit deeper in what building capacity looks like, but also local partnerships and community connections. So that's a huge area in one of the domains of, looking at cultural transformation and DEI. Transparency, accountability, rewards, and recognition. We have a lot of existing things that we do really well, and we don't want to lose sight of that. There's a lot of great things happening in housing and in workforce development. I know right now the HR team is looking at their recruitment processes and policies. So we want to be transparent in sharing what that looks like, but also acknowledging what's going well. So that's a huge piece that's just built in changing a culture so that people don't feel fearful of what this work is, but excited about that it's an impact for all of us. Coaching, mentorship, and support is like one of the main areas to lead this work, and I think an area that people often forget. Our leaders need coaching, our teams need coaching. It's like anything. If you want to keep the stamina going, you've got to have someone supporting you and asking you the tough questions and the powerful questions, but also giving you support when you feel like you're not showing up the way you want to or the way you think you should be. Mission and vision, not just a mission for the organization, but also your department's mission. How is DEI showing up in your department's mission and your vision? And then finally, and I would say sometimes the most important area is your policies, procedures, and practices. So how are they showing up through an equity lens? Have we looked at them through an equity lens, and have we changed, modified, and then sometimes even recreated policies to make sure that we have equity centered in all that we do? So as you can see, there are a lot of areas. So if you are thinking like, oh man, I thought it was just training, this is super helpful to really think about all of the moving pieces when we're operationalizing equity, particularly in a county this size. And this is just talking about internal operations, right? When we're thinking about changing the culture internally.
Robin, can I interrupt for 1 minute? Yeah. One of the reasons that this committee really was looking forward to you coming was when you look at policies, we're the committee that puts out applications to fill certain positions. And there is a little insecurity, uncertainty about the appropriate wording we can use, because we do want to make sure that everyone in the community understands this is open to everyone. But we work on the actual application. And so there was questions about how can the wording change to give that message to the community that we are looking to cast a wide net.
Yes, that's a great question, Marcia. And I will tell you that, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Gershenson.
It's okay.
I will tell you that I love that question, because I think you're right. It's like you're thinking about the language, and a lot of our leaders are asking me those exact same types of questions. Like, Robin, I want to be more inclusive with my hiring practices, but how do I say it? Like, how do I name that this is a group we're missing? And one of the things I say is, even that is so much deeper than just thinking about the wording on your application. It's thinking about, right, what is the job function, and how we looked at the job function through an equity lens. You know, if we have a job where we're saying you have to have a driver's license, and you have no reason to have to drive, then we're inequitably creating a gatekeeping mechanism where someone who could normally have that position, maybe if they don't have the ability to drive, but they have the ability to come in and really do something amazing in that position, we've already eliminated them because they don't have use of their legs. So I think that starting off and thinking about the equity in what we're asking for people to do, and being thoughtful about how inequities are built into our hiring process. But then on the other side, as we take a job description, maybe it's not so much just the language, but it's where we're putting the job description. So who are our local community partnerships? Hey, I want to send this out to this community. I want to make sure, where are the best places to get this job description out? Where's the best place for people to know, hey, if you know anyone who's interested, can you promote this in your organization? Can you promote this at your church? Can you promote this in this particular area? So, Commissioner Gershenson, I think it's so much more holistic, and I love your asking that question, and that's why I'm excited that leaders here are starting to engage in these conversations slowly, but we're getting there. Is how do we really think more holistically about creating a talent pool, if you will, and understanding some of the restraints around language and law that really create sometimes a dissonance around what we're looking to do and how we can achieve that goal.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at these 8 domains.
I can't hear you, Commissioner Jackson. I'm sorry.
I apologize. Is this
There we
better?
go.
Okay, I'm looking at these 8 domains, and they in no way look sequential as far as my experience in the workforce. Could you comment on a lot of times management change and looking at organizations, the mission and vision is set out first, in the introduction of work. Where are we right now with the mission and vision for your work?
Really good to acknowledge, Commissioner Jackson, that they're not in kind of this sequential order. And the reason why is because they're all moving together. We could put this in a circle, we could put this in any order you want, but the reality is all of these things are happening simultaneously, if you will, because you can't do one without the other. Like if you're pushing out a mission and vision, you have to make sure you're training people to know what that looks like, and you have to be transparent in what that mission and vision looks like, and you need to build in rewards and recognition so people who are following that mission and vision have a way, kind of a dangle to say, hey, I want to keep doing this, and you have to coach your leaders to make sure that they can also bring that narrative forward. I could keep going on with all of these areas. The piece is that they're all moving together. They're not isolated. In terms of where we are with the mission and vision around DEI, we're still in the awareness phase. And the next slide that I'll show you is how we're going through a DEI change management process and what that looks like as I lead us through each phase. But the key is that all of these are together, right? And we can't separate them. We can't just focus on one. Now, sometimes we will put more resources or more effort into one, but the key is that we need to be aware that all of these areas are moving, and we need to be paying special attention to all of them if we want to operationalize equity within our culture. So I will move to the next slide, Commissioner Jackson, to support the question you just asked, and I'm more than happy to move back here if there's more questions. So, there we go. So when we look at the organizational DEI change management strategy, there are a lot of ways to look at this. You know, if you know anything about organizational development, Lewin has a model where it's a unfreeze the system, then kind of move things in the system, and then refreeze the system. Well, I can tell you in 10 years as a practitioner, those three phases have never been enough, particularly as it works into DEI change management, because there's so many moving pieces. So the first phase is unfreezing the system, and that's where we were when I first came in, right? You all brought me in, and it was time to kind of disrupt the homeostasis. COVID did a great job of disrupting the homeostasis of this organization and so many organizations, because people were grappling with this change and trying to figure out what it felt like to work from home, understanding this new normal, if there was a such. And so for me to come in, it was important for me to understand all of these moving pieces that were already happening in an organization where the homeostasis, if you will, was disrupted, but also how could I capitalize off of that movement? And so I did a lot of assessment during that first year, a lot of awareness, the cultural assessment, the internal and external, but also I did a lot of cultural walks. I would just go into departments and I would look around and see what the culture was inclusive of, and maybe some areas it wasn't so inclusive of. And these are all things that I think that people misunderstand, that in that phase one, I'm not coming in to rock the system. I'm coming in to indulge in the system, to engage in the system, to understand the system. There were some really great things that we have going on here, and there were some things that we needed to change immediately, but they're all of value and they're all a part of our system. And so in order to move a culture, you have to embrace and understand the current culture that you walk into. So that's where we are in some of our phases. Another piece to that is when you move to phase two, you know, you start looking at your DEI action plan. So you've done a lot of assessment. You've assessed your policies. You've assessed where your training is. Remember, all of these areas that we talked about are going through that assessment phase. All of these areas are going through that phase one. We're looking at assessment. We're assessing our mission and vision. Does it align to equity? We're assessing our DEI efficacy. How is DEI showing up in our culture? So all of those areas are going through that phase one. When we move to phase two and we start doing the movement, that's where we start turning up the heat. So if you notice, I have anger. It's like confusion. It's like, what are they doing? Is this a zero sum? Am I going to lose something if we start implementing this? And those are all real reactions and emotions, and we'll talk about that. But it's important to know that during that DEI action plan and development, that's where we're starting to move into. And people get concerned and people get uncomfortable. The implementation phase is where we say, okay, we've got a plan and now we're going to start implementing it. And you start stirring up the pot. You can lose people during that phase. So it's imperative, like we talked about, that coaching and support, so that if you're implementing an action plan, people are feeling like it's being done with them and not to them, right? That they're a part of this process. The evaluation and operationalizing, which is the love, the sweet spot is where we want to be, reinforcing the system with sustainable supports. But as you can see, it takes a lot to get there, and you want to make sure that each phase is really sustained with thoughtfulness and support. And in thinking about, are we missing anything, and are we missing people, and have we not put the right structures in place? Because when you start reinforcing the system, you want it to be reinforced in a system that everyone benefits from, that equity is operationalized. And then finally, the reframing and review, managing and anticipated consequences, monitoring the momentum, understanding that outside forces will always impact inside your organization. And so this was important to me to frame, because I think so many times when people say, like, Robin, are we there yet? I want you all, as my partners in this work, to understand we are going through a very intentional change management strategy so that we can sustain this equity piece long after I'm gone, long after you are all gone. What the research tells us is that cultures can be sustained. We know that because there's tons of inequitable cultures that have been sustained for a very long time. And so if we use that same research, we can create sustainable cultures built with equity in mind for all of our employees, right? All of them matter, and all of them need to have a place where they feel that their culture, their voice, their leadership, their service is valued and respected. So I do want to let you know that this is typically where we stop in this process. So it felt very fluid as we were going through those phases, but typically it's the implementation phase is where this work stops, and it's because that's where it gets scary. Now we're saying, hey, we're implementing this work, and it's time to hold some people accountable. So it's imperative that we do a lot of groundwork in phases 1 and 2, so that once we get to phase 3, people are not stopping the process, and that we do have momentum that can continue. Now, a couple of things I do want to say before I open up for any questions on this area is these phases are not restricted to a year. So it's not like phase 1 is a year, phase 2 is a year, phase 3 is a year. Phases are intentional movement, thinking about how are we looking at all of those areas that we talked about and sustaining the system. So some phases we can move quickly through, and other phases not so quickly through. And some areas, for example, training and development may be in phase 2, while DEI efficacy and organizational culture may still be in phase 1. Building capacity may be moving towards phase 2. So those areas can be in different phases as well. So it's important that we're always evaluating where are we in each of those areas, where should our resources go, where should our momentum go, where should our focus be looking at as we think about all of these moving pieces. So before I move on, what questions do you have for me?
Robin, thank you so much. I want to go back to one of the comments I know Commissioner Gershenson had started within her question. So here in the Legislative Affairs and Government Operations Committee, we do a lot of interviewing for various different appointments and boards. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we are including in our applications is not only looking at the wording, but also even more so, where do we make sure that we're targeting a diverse applicant of individuals? And one of the things that I really would like to gain more insight on as we go through these processes of interviewing and holding applications is are there strategies and hiring, posting techniques and areas that we should be focusing on so we are bringing in a more diverse pool of individuals for these different various board appointments and positions on boards?
Yes, absolutely. So, as I started to talk about earlier, and I'm sorry if I shifted, one of the biggest ways to gain momentum around diversity and hiring is building relationships with communities and then really using those groups to help you push your recruitment. Recruitment strategies internally are always something that's important, but you miss people. If you go through Indeed, we know that those engage a more diverse applicant pool, but we also know that not everyone has access to the internet. And so sometimes the positions that we're looking at, if we're isolating all of our efforts to more of the digital piece, we're missing the digital divide. The other thing is that Language also has shown in some cases that it actually creates more barriers to bringing in, racial diversity, neurodiversity. So when you start labeling, hey, we want people who have this particular area that we're missing, people will feel like, I don't want to be like a specialty hire. I want to be hired because I'm valued and because I'm doing well and because I'm an asset to the organization. So I think, again, it's really modeling and using your actions and even what your application looks like, if it's on a website, right? Thinking about if you want a certain group, make sure that they're visible in your posting. Make sure people can picture themselves there, that they can imagine themselves working with you. The language saying, we're welcoming a group who also has experience in thinking about diversity through a systemic lens. So even in your request of who you want, naming diversity within, that this is something that we're looking at because this is something that we feel is an asset. Because then those who have been minoritized or historically not given an opportunity, they're like, oh, so they want people who have this lens. I can do that, or I'm happy that that's what they're looking at. So again, some of it is in the imagery of the posting, you putting in language to show people the value that you have, which then kind of connects to the value of their personal identity. Again, I can't say it enough that the best movement that I've had when I've been really intentional in trying to get people from different populations who have historically not had opportunities in organizations, I work with the communities that I want to see in my organization, and they help you post, they help you market, they help get people to apply, and they almost become a mouthpiece for you because they start supporting like, hey, I talked to somebody and they're looking for a hire, you should apply. So we can definitely have an offline conversation to go deeper, but I hope I was able to give you a little bit more insight into that question.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Commissioner Lubes, followed by Commissioner Gershenson.
Is working with HR on the application and testing something you do?
A few years ago, we had movement with drop the box or removing the box with the checking regarding a past felony. But as I understood, at that time, the application process was tedious and the testing wasn't equitable. Is that something you're also looking at?
Absolutely. When we talk about the HR process, we are talking about from beginning to end. And I think that that's such a good point because one of the things that people also don't consider is sometimes when we start doing blind applications, they can create more inequities if we're not careful. And I will give you an example of that is I was working with an organization a few years back and they did the blind application process, but then when they had like job fairs and people were coming and they were getting the people they wanted and then they would apply, the application process was blinded. So they felt like, hey, we're having a hard time, we recruited these people and now we don't know how to get them in. But the other thing is implicit biases are still lurking. So even when you blind an application and you can't see the candidate's name, the candidate's school that they go to, there can be some bias there. Community college versus universities, HBCUs, historically Black universities, can be a telltale of a race. When you start looking at people's work history, some people have had more opportunities to gain employment and leadership opportunities or, more reputable organizations than others. And so if you don't mirror some of these movements and policies with thoughtfulness around education and coaching, you will find yourself getting to the same outcomes that are inequitable as you started with. So I just want to name that, yes, we are looking, and I think that the add-on is looking through an equity lens at every level of the phase to ensure that it's institutionalized, right? That it doesn't feel like a checkoff.
Thank you. Commissioner Gershenson, followed by Commissioner Jackson.
Well, Commissioner Lubes, that's just where I was really thinking is about HR, because as commissioners, we can tell our staff, we want this to go out to the Asian American community, we want this to go out to different communities, but then we were told at some point, some of our postings, some of our applications go through HR. So and maybe we should ask April, to come in and address that, because we want to be sure that once it leaves us and it goes to HR, they're mirroring the type of distribution that we want. We don't get the feedback, yeah, this went out to these 5 organizations. We've studied for years the organizations we want to touch, but we need to be assured that our HR department is doing that, and we don't really get that feedback back from HR. So as you're looking at the whole system, I just wanted that to be incorporated, that we want that to be implicit in the applications, that it goes out to this diverse pool of organizations in our community that most of which we know about.
So I think maybe
Absolutely.
if I'm hearing what you're saying, Commissioner Gershons, I think maybe the broader but more specific question is, Robin, within what you do with DEI, are you working closely with HR?
We are definitely having conversations and partnering. I will tell you that a part of the assessment phase and the movement phase is really getting people to no longer work in silos and to start connecting the work, because DEI can't be housed in a department. DEI is everywhere. Equity is everywhere. Our hiring is connecting with DEI. Our procurement is connecting with DEI. Our housing practices and policies. I work very closely with the health division around looking at equity. So to answer your question, yes, we are definitely starting to create more collectivism, I guess maybe is a word that I would use, to start helping departments know that these are things that we're partnering together. So yes, April and I have been definitely talking about what this can look like and what this needs to look like in HR. I do think it would be great to have April come. I know that we have Susan who's working on recruitment, and they are working on some of those processes, and I've been working with Susan to talk with her about how we look at a sustainable policy around what we're doing in hiring, and that it can't be, that it can't be just the top of the iceberg. Like, hey, we're recruiting to all of these places. What does every layer of the recruitment process look like, and where are some of those gatekeeping areas that we don't realize that are actually stopping the opportunities from happening? And I think the other side to that is, once we get certain groups of people who have been historically marginalized, whether it's people of color, whether it's those who have neurodiversity, do we have a culture that sustains when they get here? Meaning, can we keep them here? Can we retain them here? So I think that these conversations that I'm having are going far beyond the reach of just getting a person in, far beyond the reach of where we're recruiting, but it's, if we're recruiting, how are we, how is our process supporting or burdening what we're trying to do? So yes, to answer all of those questions, absolutely, we are having conversations. I think it's great to ask those questions. April would definitely, I think, be open to be able to share what they're doing. But yes, as you can hear, right, it's so big, and I think it's important for us to all understand that there's so many moving pieces. The other thing, again, I can't stress it enough, is as HR puts those postings out, if there are other community groups that simply word of mouth telling people, hey, there's a posting coming out, if you know people, please, if you have groups that please let them know. I think that some of the organizations that have the best recruitment around diversity, it's because people have gotten, they've taken ownership of that, and leaders have said, you know what, the HR process has a role in this, but so do I. And I can also be a lot more intentional in how I'm speaking out and talking to communities about applying as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you. And Robin, I appreciate your dialogue on this, and my head is spinning because I see that it's all encompassing. It's not, and HR is a big piece of this work, and workforce development, but then also policies and procedures and looking at our systems in a way that we haven't before. Going to HR, for instance, historically, we were a county that promoted hiring family. And the nepotism, that's what that's, okay, so, and that was part of how people came. You know, it was generational. Families came, and at a certain point, the families didn't represent everybody that the county is representing now. We know we've had a shift in employment. We're looking for different people to fulfill roles within our county and certain jobs. So even that fact that, you know, people aren't even having as many children as they used to even refer to the county. And so this work also will approach that. And that's just one aspect, because I think the HR aspect is where this work gets a bad name. And people say, oh, you know, we don't want to replace folks. And that's really, it's so much deeper than that from what you have described. I mean, we as a commission, if we even look at, and we know we're a bipartisan board, we have a North and South County divide as far as Democratic and Republican commissioners that we really have to pay attention to. An example was our parks and recreation. We had an urban park strategy because the parks on the north end of the county had to be operationalized different than the parks on the south end of the county. And so to look at things like this and having a diversity officer in place who's not just trying to replace folks through the workplace development, which what we need to do anyway because of where we are right now with HR, we also, like you said, have to look at gender, abilities, and geography. And that's just 3 other things. And so I'm just at a point where I'm seeing how encompassing this work truly is and what we have to do when we're in the awareness stage right now. And I'm glad that you're here to impart what we need to be thinking about and how we need to be looking at it. Because I think generally, and this is my opinion, and then please weigh in, that people just see it as workforce development, but it's much bigger.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Commissioner Jackson, I'm happy that you're framing it in that way, because it wasn't my intention to overwhelm you all, but it was certainly my intention to make you all aware of how big this is, because this is a partnership, right? I'm doing this in partnership with you all. I am doing this in partnership with the county. And I think the more we understand that this is a partnership, the more that you all have to understand what this process looks like so that you can be invested, but also you can find the ways that you can fit into support in this process. When you're out and talking about it, you have the language to know at Oakland County, we're going through a DEI change management strategy. That's important because no other organizations are really leading it in this way. And I'm grateful that you all are trusting me to lead it in this way. But I think that it's important and imperative that we see we have a lot of moving pieces and we can't lose sight of how they're all interacting and working together.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. I have a quick question in regards to hybrid workplaces, right? So here just more recently, the county has adopted a hybrid work policy, right? How has this altered the DEI process? And as we move forward with a hybrid work policy, do you think that there's going to be a need for additional resources or trainings or things specific to DEI and now a hybrid work place?
Yeah. So I will tell you that the idea of a hybrid workplace makes my heart sing, because as a DEI and equity practitioner, adaptability is key. I am always looking at how are we adjusting to the environment around us, and I think that that's exactly what COVID has forced us to do. And I think at Oakland County, us looking at a hybrid work opportunity to really think about the needs of how the work environment has changed and is changing for employees. Yes, a DEI lens must be at the table. Resources, I think about so many organizations who are providing employees with, laptops, but do they actually have internet at home? thinking about how those can impact opportunities and access. So we are continuously keeping those conversations at the table. I'm always making sure that I make space for my colleagues who are doing this great work. I know that April is leading that hybrid initiative, and so I think it would be great to bring her in to talk about that. I don't want to steal her thunder, but what I will tell you is a DEI lens is absolutely looking through that, and you're right. We can't miss the opportunity to understand that where some processes and policies are exciting for some, it may be a burden for others. And I think that's where, again, when we're looking at operationalizing equity, everything we do should be going through an equity lens to make sure that all people at the table are being considered.
Thank you, Robin.
So, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I am going to, I know that I only have I think 15 minutes, so I apologize. We only have about 2 more slides, and then I'll make sure that if there's anything else you want me to go over, I will do that. I think as we talked a lot about this area, we saw a lot of emotions. And if you notice, I never really named an emotion as negative because I don't think that they are. When we're thinking about change management, DEI change management specifically is my background in changing systems and looking at DEI cultural change. The strategy feels very linear, right? We have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, but the process and implementation is messy and emotional. And that is okay, because you see me smiling. Every day, am I smiling about it? Absolutely not. Some days I'm banging my head against the wall. But what I want you all to know is that emotional reactions to change are normal and expected. And so when you all are asking me how am I receiving change, it doesn't always feel good. But the reality is it's a part of the work. And that's what you all trust me to do, is to lead this work. But that means that in this process, we have to build in the fact that we understand all of these emotions happening. And some of the ways we're supporting those emotions are through coaching and mentoring. Some of the ways is we're consistently looking at how's the efficacy in our organizational culture? How are people receiving the change? Do we need to implement more training and development? Do we have capacity to support these ideas and these emotions, not just for employees, but for leaders too, right? Change is hard for leaders too. And so I just want you to be aware that as we're thinking about these emotions, I am not looking at these emotions as good or bad, but rather I'm looking at them as a normal evolution of change and being very strategic and thoughtful about how we engage those that are resistant. Resistance sometimes produces the best outcomes because when people resist, you get on your toes and you start figuring it out, like, why are they resisting? And then you find all of these strategies and you think you're addressing 4 people, and in fact, you're addressing 400 concerns. So sometimes that resistance helps you be a lot more thoughtful in how you're engaging people. I always say these processes feel good and exciting, but you can never lose sight that in these processes, we have real life people, real life emotions, a lot of different experiences that we have to consider as we move people together, right? So I just want you to also be aware that as these emotions come up, we want to make sure that we're building capacity around DEI to support their responses to change, but also helping normalize, operationalize, and of course, sustain the efforts in each phase. So one of the ways that I think will be really helpful for you all to understand is when I started the Oakland County Equity Council, my big vision, and I'm not there yet, because as you know, we have a change strategy we're going through, but that Oakland County Equity Council was merely the top strategy to get representation across the organization for people to start thinking about it and talking about it. But the next layer to that is departmental equity teams. We want departments so committed that they have teams that are focusing on equity in hiring, equity in access, looking at their culture inside of their departments. We have some departments that are gender imbalanced, right? When I walk in here, if I am the opposite gender, do I feel welcome and valued? All gender identities, even as we think about non-binary, should feel really comfortable in their work environment. And so these departmental equity teams get to think about all of those areas. And that is a great way to, again, layer equity within your organization. The next layer is city equity collaboratives. We don't want to forget that this work does expand outside. I know I haven't presented a lot, but I do a lot. Just last night, I was at Wayne State I was a panelist around looking at social equity in government. And so a lot of the collaborations that I do outside of the county, building opportunities, teaching, connecting, learning, is also a way to continue to engage leaders. So at some point, we want our city leaders, our CVTs, to be engaged so that they can start laying the foundation of leading equity. This is tough stuff, and a lot of people don't know where to start. And so how can we become conveners to help people understand how to lay the foundation? And then finally, community change agents, which are always the most powerful, right? Because residents coming together and working collaboratively is always such a powerful voice, but we just need to make sure that we are collectively understanding all of those needs and building capacity throughout. So I wanted to make sure that I took the opportunity to share with you all, you know, a more holistic way of how I'm leading this work. And then provide you with opportunities to ask questions, because, you know, I always want to make sure that you know we are partners in this work, and it's my job to make sure that you are up to date and aware on the strategy, but also that I'm creating space for you to challenge me and ask me questions so that I can make sure that as a practitioner, I'm leading in collaboration through equity.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Commissioner Gershenson.
Well, thank you, Robin. I think we all would love a copy of this presentation. But one of the issues that's a little confusing is sometimes when we're out there talking about Oakland County, and Oakland County hired the first diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, the community thinks that we hired it for the community. And so we've had CVTs, local CVTs, call us and say, you know, can I talk to Robin? I have a question. When in fact, you are dealing with our infrastructure, the 4,000 plus employees that our county has. And even on our questionnaires, it's very confusing sometimes to say, well, we hired this for Oakland County. We hired it for ourselves. And so there's a little bit of a confusing message in many of the marketing materials that we have as a county, that the county thinks we're talking about the county, and the million residents would have access to our diversity officer. So I want clarification from you, because I have heard from some of my CVTs that want to reach out to you. And so I'm thrilled it's in your building blocks. But where do we stand with that now? What is the access for our communities?
So I will tell you that there is no, you know, they're not confused. The reality is I was hired to lead internal and external. But as you can see, it's massive. And so, you know, it was important to me to get us internally set before I started pushing out. So a lot of my efforts externally has been, there are tons of people that reach out to me asking me questions. Robin, I want to lead this work. And I'm like, whoa. Let's talk about readiness. Are you ready? And let's think about some of the areas you can start. So I'm having a lot of conversations with people who call me, who find me, who email me. But I also do a lot of opportunities to go out and build connections. But we do need to be more intentional at some point around what external looks like. And I am looking at that as we move more into phase 2 and 3. But it was important to me to make sure that we had some sustainable pieces internally before I started moving my efforts externally, right? So yes, to answer your question, it is my role to lead this work internally and externally. And I think one of the ways that we can start doing some of that is through that building block that I showed you with the equity collaborative for the CVTs. Start laying foundations so that they have some of the tools and knowledge. One of the things I think is important is that I'm not the knowledge holder. But that there's ways for me to give those tools and resources out so that people have some of those answers. And I think also maybe one of the areas I can start thinking about is brainstorming. How can I create more opportunities so that when they have questions, they can seek me out in a more consistent basis. So thank you for bringing that. And yeah, it is a million residents who are wanting to know. I've had, you know, a lot of different groups reach out to me. Can I help them lay the foundation? Am I willing to come in and help and support? But really my efforts right now are focused internally to make sure that we have some of our things cleaned up inside in terms of laying an equity lens.
Excellent. Well, Commissioner Jackson.
Okay, I just want to say again that looking at
the presentation that is very massive. I see that we're going to touch a lot of people in a lot of different ways and kind of meet people where they are. And going back to what I stated about there's a divide, North and South Oakland County, and there's reasons for that divide. The South End is a little more diverse in population. And so I just want to see efforts that really meet people's needs and then also advance what they may need in the future as we are becoming a more diverse county. I know this isn't your first role in this work. How many people work along with you in what you're doing, and what kind of support would you need just from the executive office and the board? What are some of your desires as far as helping you accomplish this work? Good question, Janet.
You're one
person.
That's a good question. You know, one of the things I'll say is I've gotten very creative with building capacity. If you notice, I talk a lot about that capacity because I do recognize I'm one person, but I also recognize that this work cannot be egotistical. It cannot be centered in me. It has to be centered in all of us. And so how am I creating opportunities for others within the county to lead this work? And so we started some of that work with the Equity Council, but we want to branch that down. In terms of building more resources around this work, we are having conversations internally right now and looking at what supports and resources look like for the DEI office because it is so massive. I think in terms of, you know, how we can collaborate together, you know, what do I need from the Board of Commissioners and what do I need from other departments and teams? I think it's evolving, and I'm always open to present to you all so that you can also say, like, when I hear you all say, Robin, policy is where we are, then that's a light bulb for me because now I get to start thinking about what does that look like for you all and what does that mean? There are some great equity frameworks that I've created in the past for different organizations as we look through policy reviews through an equity lens. And I always include my boards. You know, I want my commissioners, my boards to know, hey, this is what it looks like to look at things through the equity lens and then letting them kind of lean in as well. So I think as we continue to evolve in this work, that is where I can find my ways to say, hey, I think I could use more support and you all to be able to lean in and say, hey, Robin, we can definitely support here. You know, there's no one magic way to do this. I think every organization finds its way. I think the key is creating collaborative opportunities so that we can find a way to engage together.
Thank you. And any support that we can offer, or, you know, I could say I can offer, please, you know, just continue your dialogue with us. So, you know, we know this was very, very eye-opening just to see the breadth of all that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. To echo my colleagues, Robin, it has truly been an informative presentation, and we greatly appreciate the work that you're doing in building that capacity as it surrounds diversity and equity and an inclusive workplace. And as you've already heard, I look forward to continuous conversations as we do move forward. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. And what I would like to do, I would like to receive and file the presentation that Robin has given. So do we have a motion to receive and file this PowerPoint? So motion by Commissioner Gershenson, support by Commissioner Jackson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Again, thank you so much, Robin, for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Commissioners, next up on our agenda, we've got our second public comment. So at this time, I would like to open up our second public comment. And as a reminder, this is for anything on the agenda or not on the agenda. So if there's anyone from the public who'd like to address the Legislative Affairs and Government Operations Committee, please make your way to the head of the table, state your name and community in which you reside in. Good morning.
Good morning. I guess I feel obligated since I'm here. I owned and ran a business for over 20 years. I hired and fired a lot of people, and I never felt like I needed a DEI team to coach me in the right direction. right? I don't know, it's making me very nervous. I see what you guys did last week with the World Economic Forum, 2 weeks before that with the World Health Organization sustainability presentation. All the things that you guys are hammering down on, Oakland County just doesn't feel supported locally. There's this global agenda that's being pushed, and whether you're aware of it or not, I think you guys are being played in part of this global agenda. So I really encourage everybody to kind of take a step back and look at what's really being pushed. Why are these agendas being pushed like this in every angle, in every community, in every school system? There's just something that intuitively feels wrong about it, and it's just very concerning to me. So I hope you guys, last week there was, at the commissioners meeting, how many hours of public comment were there where people were educating you on what's going on with the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab? Because it's going to impact us, it's going to impact our children, it's going to impact future generations. So the choices that we make now are going to have a long-term effect on not just our county, but our state and our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to address the Legislative Affairs and Government Operations? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Commissioners, is there any further business to come before us today? Seeing none, without objection, I declare this meeting adjourned at 10:55 a.m. Thank you, everyone.